ready? Thanks again for joining us. Another amazing episode of the Nonprofit Show. This week is flying by, and we definitely want to say thanks to our presenting sponsors. You can see their logos on the screen here. We are so grateful to have your support and partnership as we continue collectively to really, evolve our conversations across the nation as it pertains to our nonprofit community. So thank you so much for supporting us. And Julia Patrick is here, of course, the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I'm Jarrett Ransom, very fortunate to serve alongside Julia as her co-host. She refers to me as her nonprofit nerd, but I'm also your nonprofit nerd and the nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group. And today's guest is Amelia. And I must say that is one of my favorite names of all times. You are the founder and consultant at DataViz for nonprofits. And from what I know about you already, this is going to be a fun show.
Absolutely. I think so. Data is something I love to talk about. It might make other people yawn, but I hope by the end of our conversation will be just the opposite.
I love it. Let's make data sexy. That's something we've said since like the middle of March, is data can really be sexy.
Cool. I'm with you already.
We need to do that. And I think that one of the things I was so intrigued by what you were all about, Amelia, was that you reached out to us on LinkedIn, and your whole emphasis is not only understanding the data, but how you communicate it. And you use the word visualization, which is just like, oh my gosh, this is where we need help in the nonprofit sector so much. So what is data visualization? Let's start there.
Sure. So data visualization, or DataViz for short, is really a fancy way of saying charts, maps, and graphs. It's really any way of making data more accessible, particularly to non-data people. So, so when you think about it, if you see a spreadsheet, it doesn't really communicate much to you. It doesn't tell a story, right? But if you look at a painting, say the Mona Lisa, you're not going to read the Mona Lisa from top to bottom and from left to right. You're going to take it all in together, and almost instantly, you know what you're looking at, right? And that's because our brains are specially geared for visual analysis. We can understand visual cues like color, shape, size, position at lightning speed. So what data visualization is all about is really transferring data from being encoded in words and numbers, which we're not so good at because we've only been processing words and numbers for a few thousands of years, to visual cues, which we've been processing for millions of years. And that allows us to use our sort of visual superpowers to much better understand data.
You blew my mind with the Mona Lisa analogy. I mean, literally, I love that. And I say, in my studio, I'm a very visual person, very visual learner. And what I didn't understand very early in my career was why board members really, appreciated charts. Because I thought, okay, financial numbers, that's easy to put in a chart, but how do we visualize our success, our impact in other ways that's much more palatable and easy maybe to absorb? And your Mona Lisa analogy makes all the sense in the world to me now.
Excellent.
Yeah, amazing. I'm curious about that, because when you talk about using visualization, I'm noticing more and more, of course, we all are, tech companies coming into the nonprofit sector. Yeah, sure. And they're all offering dashboards, and they're all taking the representation of whatever it is they're tracking and creating charts and graphs. And I think it's just in the last 5 years revolutionized how you can serve an organization when you're quickly coming in and out like a board member. You're not there every day working on using the same data. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk us through that a little bit, because I think this is just amazing.
Well, you're absolutely right, Julia. There are so many more DataViz applications and software out there, and it really makes data visualization much more accessible to, people who are not graphic designers or data analysts. DataViz people kind of live in this weird intersection of artists and analysts, which,
Right.
it's a weird marriage, right? It's an odd couple marriage. But that's exactly what you have to do, is sort of funnel both your analyst and your artist to make great data visualizations. But now there's all these great new programs, some of which are free, that nonprofits can use to visualize their data. And they go way beyond what you can just do with simple static charts in Excel. The program I use the most is called Tableau. And Tableau actually has a free product called Tableau Public, which you can use for non-sensitive data. You won't want to, you have to save it to their server. So you won't want to use sensitive data like health data or education data, but it's good for a lot of other kinds of data. And it's completely free. They also offer discounts for nonprofits, as do other companies. Yeah. So it's really sort of put data visualization into the hands of a lot of people. But just like all these online free art programs too, there's a lot to know about how to visualize data well. So just having the application doesn't sort of maybe accomplish everything that you want.
Well, and to know, like, what are the data, what is the data that we want to share? What are those metrics? What's important? Right. I'm a novice when it comes to graphics and things like that, but I typically know and can coach my clients. These are the hot ticket items that you want to be sharing, right? And then I always mention Canva, which is a really good.
I love Canva.
Yeah, it's user friendly, and they've got wonderful infographic templates. So for someone that's really a beginner, that is what I would say, like, the easiest thing to do. But to be able to tell your story in a visual representation and to include the data to match both people that both mindsets that you really want to attract. What a great way to do that.
Right. And there's all kinds of things we can learn from graphic design, sort of the tenets of great composition to make data more accessible. And you're right, programs like Canva are great, but more programs that are more geared towards data allow you to create interactive visualizations, including data dashboards that you can't create in programs like Canva. So there's a role for both that organizations can use.
Great.
Talk to us a little. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That takes us to the next level, right? If it's an integrated, an active, and of course now so much of us are digital, here we are in the nonprofit show, a live webcast. And so if you can have that interactive data, I'm thinking of an impact report, an annual report, something like that. And it takes you down a few different rabbit holes to go further into the data. Wow. There's so much greatness and benefit to that.
Absolutely. I really advocate and do for my clients to don't have an annual report, have a report that shows your current data. Annual reports, the moment they're published, they're out of date.
They're outdated.
Right. So if you have a interactive annual or living report rather than annual report on your website that's connected to real-time data, you have something that's much more valuable to share with your stakeholders.
Okay, that blows my mind. And that is sexy.
We knew we were going to like you.
We knew you were like our type of girl. Okay, so let's talk about this, because I don't know of anyone who's ever done this outside of maybe, and this is just top of mind, outside of like a very specific fundraising event or drive. Where you're doing almost like a countdown concept, or you're showing some movement. But I love what you just said, Amelia, because imagine if you were a funder and you could see this action moving along.
Absolutely. You can show progress over time. You can show progress in relationship to benchmarks and goals. And you can actually do that with Tableau's free product called Tableau Public. You can create something really sophisticated and beautiful and interactive connect it to real-time data, and then embed it in your website.
Oh my God.
Now, is
That
this
is
something
super
that
cool.
all organizations should be doing, or is this really for the big dogs, the ones that have multi-million dollars? Where does this really fit in? I think I know my answer, but I'd love to hear from you.
I think it's everyone. Just to tell you a little bit about my clientele, they're mostly in sort of the small to mid-range nonprofits in terms of budget size. Really large nonprofits are going to have some data visualization capacity in-house, but everyone needs it, right? Because even the tiniest organization is collecting a lot of data. And what I have found is it's often this really worst case scenario where they're spending a lot of resources, time, and bandwidth collecting and storing data, but then they're not putting it to good use. So it's sort of like, why collect it at all if you're not going to really leverage it? And they're not putting it to good use for all kinds of really good, understandable reasons. But I worked most of my career as a researcher and worked a lot with organizations that serve children and families, and found this to be the case. And that's how I got interested in data visualization, is how can we make data usable? So like the road from data to action is much shorter for organizations that don't have high-level data analysts on staff.
I'm thinking of our own journey here, Jarrett and I, with the nonprofit show. And Jarrett was like all over me, like white on rice, as we say, to get a viewers survey done. And I was like, sister, I don't have time for this. And I'm like, I know what our viewers want and what they're,
So much so, I'm gonna call you out, Julia. I said, I'm feeling some pressure against this. Like you're really not wanting to do this. What's behind that?
I know she called me out, but I'm telling you, when I did it, and I was amazed that I thought I knew what was going on. And then there were different pieces that actually opened my mind for other directions. It wasn't that I was right or I was wrong, but it kind of gave me a window as to what some other possibilities were, how we could be better. It was just so interesting. And I found that I think that people that would say something to my face it would have been one response, but when it was anonymous and they didn't have that personal interaction, maybe they were freer to say things differently. It was very interesting to me.
Well, and data shapes decisions, right? It helps us to course correct. It helps us to realize, what are we providing our community, our constituency base, and then how might we improve on what we're doing? Or do we need to stop it altogether? It's reminding me of our conversations that we had last week with the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, and Rita Sorinen was talking about how we did a pilot and we were very clear on the numbers, and we were prepared to change if our product, our program, or what have you was not successful. And you only know that through data.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You see this a lot on websites and annual reports where organizations, and for good reason, really focus in on, what a researcher would call a case study. So they have really engaging photo of a client and perhaps a story of that client's journey. There's definitely a place for that, but what a data visualization can do is put that story in context. And you really need that context to understand. Going back to Julia's example of a survey, you might get a few really negative responses. You need to understand, are those outliers, or is that something that's really common? Maybe it's not common across all respondents, but it is really common in a subgroup, those from a certain geographic area or a certain age range. And that's where an interactive dashboard can really come into handy, because you can really focus in on, not only how everyone's doing, all your clients, all your donors, all your respondents, but how subgroups are doing and who's sort of driving the change.
And to enhance the data with the story, right? The success story. Right. We also had on Allison Rapping, and I don't mean to be name dropping, but we have some really amazing guests on. She was talking about how she tells the story of the women that served time in prison. you know, and that really elevates their organization at large because it is a personal story. And I can imagine, Amelia, to tie that in and to complement to the data is, you know, by far the best way to blend the two.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you, so since we're talking about this, a couple questions. How important is it to quantify, or maybe not quantify, but disclose what your sample size is and all of the collection data behind it? You can tell Stats 101 in college is coming through.
Oh, it was just a few years ago.
Yeah, right.
Good.
So, I mean, that's one thing I'm curious about, because in many ways you can make data really speak to you a lot of different ways depending on how it's being cultivated. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, there's a great sort of classic book called How to Lie with Data. And of course, you can lie with data quite easily depending on how you present it. So it's extremely important to report on your sample size.
Okay.
The problem with small samples is they're not necessarily obviously representative of the population you're trying to represent. And they tend to have extreme values in them, you know, because any one data point has an outsized impact on the average or however you're summarizing your data. So, so a savvy data consumer will look at a small sample and put a lot less weight on your findings. But absolutely, you need to also be really aware and obviously quite ethical in how you present data so that you don't distort what the story really is. And that's a whole show unto itself.
Yeah. Well, I received that hint. So thank you. I think we will have to have you on. I'm writing these down. So Tableau is something that you recommended. And then How to Lie with Data was a book that you.
It's from the 1950s. I believe the author is Daryl Huff. Yeah, but it's as relevant today as it was then.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. What about when you share your data and it's not quite what you thought it would be or what you hoped it would be, right? Yeah, and we want to report it in an ethical manner. And maybe we want to say, you know, we increased, but what if we didn't? Or, you know, what if we said we serve X amount of this population? And what if we didn't?
Right, right. And of course, that's where some of the line can come in, because you can cut off a curve at any point that you want. You know, what if your numbers went down in March, just report until February, you know, whatever.
I've never thought of that.
I have never thought of that. Oh my gosh.
But you don't do that, right? You need to say,
you don't want to do that. What you always want to do is put your data into context. So you want to provide a really accessible way of explaining what people are looking at. And you need to do that carefully. You don't want to just put it in the fine print that no one's going to read. It's about using data labels and subtitles strategically so people can understand if there's going back to, you know, a trend. If there's a dip in the trend, label that point in time and tell them what happened at that moment. Perhaps a pandemic began.
A narrative component to that.
Right, exactly. So there's lots of ways to provide sort of signposts within your data visualization to walk your viewer through it.
Wow.
I love that word signpost, because I think, you know, all bets are off when we try and communicate about what's going on this year. That's going to be one thing. But if you're working with a group and maybe, let's say 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, and we have a whole different cadre of leadership or board or funders, and then there'll be this like weird numbers around 20 to 21, and we'll need some of that clarification, because you know, things will change. It's like hard to believe that we are navigating towards the end of our time, but I really want to talk to you about strategies for better data visualization, because I think that there can be, you know, all manner of level. You could be kind of that lower level, and then there can be things that are a lot more sophisticated. And I'm wondering kind of how we bridge those two levels, if you will.
Sure. I have my 10 DataViz suggestions. I won't go into 10 today, don't worry. But if you want more sort of tips on data visualization, I do have a blog called the 60-second data tip. You can go to my website, which is nonprofitviz.com, and sign up, and you'll get a free, literally 60-second tip. So you can become a data viz wizard 1 minute at a time.
Oh my gosh.
1 minute per week. So you can find a lot of these suggestions, but I'll give you a few right now to turn a good visualization into a great one. One thing you have to think about is how you're going to encode the data. And what I mean by that is simply, rather than showing it in words and numbers, what colors, shapes, size, what are you going to use? What are those visual cues you're going to use to show your data? And one reason why you see bar charts all over the place is because human beings are really good at assessing position along a common scale. We're excellent at that. Okay. What we're not so good at is assessing other encodings that have to do with color shading or angle, for example. So if I showed you one bar that was twice as long as the other bar, you could understand that, right? You'll see that right away, even without any numbers attached.
Right.
But if I gave you two squares and one was twice as dark as the other one, I don't think you could assess that. You could say, yeah, this one's darker and this one's lighter, but you couldn't tell me that it was twice as dark, because we're not as good at that.
And so, not to mention those that are visually impaired, right? Like that's another challenge to this. I think about, I know a couple of people that are colorblind. And so there's shades, right? There's shades of colors that they cannot differentiate. And I can imagine how just that very simplistic visualization, is so powerful over us wanting to get really artsy.
Right. So fun fact about color blindness, 10% of men have red-green color blindness. And the reason for that is that trait is on the X chromosome. So if you're a woman, you have 2 X chromosomes, you're much less likely to have that. You're right, it's on the Y chromosome. I said that wrong. But anyway, so, no, I think I said it right the first time, because
it's on one of those.
One of them, right. Okay, whatever. I shouldn't be talking about chromosomes, not my expertise. Anyway, so you have to be really careful. I never put red and green next to each other on any chart, because you wouldn't be able to distinguish them. Yeah, so you need to encode really thoughtfully in understanding who your audience is. And since your audience are all going to be human beings, we're much better at assessing some things than others. So that's one tip I would share with you. Also regarding color is to use color sparingly. I've seen a lot of charts where everything is a bright, fully saturated color. And I think of that as sort of like yelling. And if you yell all the time, people will think you're crazy and stop listening to you.
Like all caps, right?
Exactly, all caps. Lots of exclamation points. So what you need to do is pick out your focal data points, put them in bright, fully saturated color, and then mute out the rest. Often I just only use otherwise gray, because you really need your viewers to zoom in on certain data points. So using color sparingly is another tip I would give to you. Do we have time for a third? Or
yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want more.
I know. I'm just like, keep going.
Another basic tip, if you know anything about data visualization, you might have heard of Edward Tufte, who's kind of the great grandfather of modern data visualization. And his biggest tip, which I subscribe to, is to remove distracting unnecessary elements in data visualization, again, to focus in on the key issues. So he advises to remove anything that doesn't communicate data. So he doesn't like charts that have lots of bells and whistles in them. And then even beyond bells and whistles, just grid lines that you don't necessarily need, for example, that will be distracting from the main sort of data story that you want to tell.
It makes sense.
We have a comment, and I don't want the show to end without me reading this aloud to you. A viewer writes, "Thank you for this timely conversation. I look forward to hearing more about suggestions in open data software that is available. So this content is definitely hitting home for so many people. And, you mentioned, well, that's a whole nother show, and we will be moving forward into 2021. So we do hope to have you back on, because this is just fascinating.
It's
my
great.
favorite topic. I would love to talk to you two more about it.
Yes.
It's, I think this is such a timely thing, again, because of the issue that we're all dealing with in the timing, right? End of year. We're trying to jam all this information out, our years and all that. But I think one of the things that's really interesting is that, we are not communicating in the same way because of this pandemic. And so this piece of the pie, I think, has really been almost amplified, if you will, because we're having to share things electronically. And so I would imagine that this is only going to pick up steam and just become one of those tools that we understand we need to be doing a better job with.
Well, and we talk about there's 1.8 million nonprofits in the US. And I would imagine, Amelia, that to be able to visually represent your data is one great way to set yourself apart from your competitors, collaborators, all of the same. But this is a way to really, shine your light on who you are, what you do, the impact you make. And, we're all out there. I believe in abundance, but when we talk about, there's still a finite amount of resources. So how do you set yourself apart? And data visualization is a phenomenal way to do that.
Absolutely agree.
I love it. It's been, well, I know that we were super excited when you connected with us, and this has proved to be a fabulous opportunity for us, and it's gone by crazy fast. Data visualization. This needs to go on your strategic plan moving forward. If you haven't really even tackled this for 2020, which there's been a lot to tackle in 2020, get this on your 2021 horizon, because wow, it is just such an important thing, I think. And I like what you said, Jarrett, it's going to set you apart from the rest of the marketplace. So here's Amelia Kohm's information. And you say it Kohm, right?
It's actually Kohm. I'm sorry.
Okay, Kohm.
You early on.
No, Kohm. All right. Is founder and consultant of DataViz for nonprofits. This is what's even more powerful, is that she's working in our sector.
Right. And so for more of those best practices, I know I'm going to go to your website, because you had mentioned, there's these 60-second tips so you can get smarter with your data 1 minute at a time. I feel so honored to have nerded out with you for now 30 minutes, because that takes me well above the curve, and I'm just so excited.
I look forward to my new glasses.
Yes. Make sure you send me your information.
Well, this has just been amazing, Amelia. We really are thrilled. We will get some questions, I'm sure, about this episode, and then let's chit chat about trying to get you back on maybe more towards the beginning of the year, because I'd like to have a conversation about what is it we should be tracking as we navigate into 2021, as opposed to that, dang, it's Q4. We should have been tracking this. It would really be great to kind of like pull us, to a better starting point.
Like how do we start if we don't have the data we want? Where do we even begin?
Yeah. So I think we need to tee that up. Hey, everybody, I'm Julia Patrick. I've been joined by my nonprofit nerd, your nonprofit, the nonprofit nerd, Jarrett Ransom. And what a fabulous show. Again, we could not do this without our wonderful sponsors. We're really excited. We just added Boardable yesterday, or actually early this morning. So check them out. And really an exciting thing for us is that we have our 200th episode next Monday, December 21st. So join us. We're going to do something very different for the show. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a real milestone. I'm considering, I thought maybe we would do this for 2 weeks, and then it became 3 weeks, and then it just kind of went crazy from there. So it's really an honor to be sharing this, and I hope that you join us for that. Before we log off, we have somebody that's just written in. Thank you so much. I just signed up for 60-second tips, Amelia.
Excellent.
Yes. That's fabulous. Well, hey, everybody, don't forget to check out Jarrett Ransom's fundraising workshop, theravengroup.com. She's got some really exciting things going on, and those dates are booking up fast. So she doesn't have a lot open, but you want to get on that as the year's ending and a new year is starting. Again, this has been another great episode of the Nonprofit Show. We are so delighted that you could join us. And as we like to end every show, we want to remind you to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.